In this one, I'd like to take a look at all things elderberry. We've got a peak moment. A lot of the different varieties that we're working with are in fruit production mode, near harvest. And so talking about different varieties, what our experiences have been with them, and exploring a little bit the idea of working with seedling elderberries, these nice genetically open pathways. So that's what I'd like to chat about in this video. You'll have to bear with me as I move through the dewy wildness in here and try to get to any of these plants. It's amazing how much effort it takes to have a garden. It's beautiful and wonderful, but also just feels completely out of control, even with lots of effort to try to bushwhack our way through. But anyway, here's one really fun, one wonderful old school variety. This is a varietal called York, and I've been working with this for a while. This is one of the oldest name cultivars, as far as I know, that's out there. Please, in the comments, let us know more information about these plants. Elderberry is something we work with extensively, but we're by no means experts. We just have lots, jack of all trades style with these plants. This is a relatively early ripening variety. The fruit is not particularly large, but it's decently large compared to some of the wild types. Very, very sweet. It's considered a favorite for a lot of folks, and the fruit hangs down in a way. It's relatively easy to pick either individually or to cut the stems and flash freeze them and shake them off, not unlike what we talked about in our sea berry harvesting video. York is entirely American genetics. It's very thin and upright and spreading in its habit, and very amenable to being cut back pretty hard. This is a pretty special cultivar, Wildwood. And we've been working with this one as well for a number of years. We got some cuttings in a long time ago. It's one that we make sure we always offer, along with York, to the best of our ability. When we sell bundles of dormant cuttings, we include Wildwood for a few reasons. One, it's a really nice form that the plant takes. There's an apple here in front. Bear with the fact that, yes, we have these elderberries in position, but they're intermixed with a lot of other plants. So you'll get to see them not standing stoically, gorgeously on their own, but how they work with other plants. But this is Wildwood mixed fully with an apple. And a couple things that are interesting about this plant. Number one, right now you can't see it super easily, but the flowers on these are the absolute largest. I would consider Wildwood the best variety for flower production. You can kind of get a sense why. Here is a fruit head, or a couple clusters of fruit heads here. The fruit itself, a little bit uneven ripening, decent quality. It's not like I have some particular feeling about every fruit flavor. Most elderberries for processing anyway, but you can see it's unevenly ripening. That might be a little bit about it, the elder being in competition with other characters here. But considered in my mind, incredible variety for flower harvesting if that's your thing, and decent for fruit. You can see it also periodically will sport some flowers a little later. So if your interest is in providing a long form of flow of nectar for a wide range of insects, Wildwood could be a great character. I think Wildwood and York, it sure seems, pollinate with one another. Their initial flowering overlaps, and they're both pure American. So they're a really good compatible type. Here we have one of our favorites for its power in vegetative growth. This is a varietal called Scotia. My feeling is that this is mainly American genetics, but that it has some European in there. The reason I think that is a few things. The foliage is really, really broad and wide. The level of vigor is extreme. That seems to be the case when there's hybridization between different types of plants. Kind of like a Yasta berry is way more vigorous than a gooseberry and a blackberry, that hybrid vigor idea. But I can't say that for sure, it's just a feeling. But this is Scotia. This one is not producing a ton this year because I cut it back so hard. Believe it or not, almost all of the growth you see here is new from this year. It was pollarded to about 3 feet for cuttings, and our hope is to actually cut this flush to ground late this winter, harvest all those cuttings, and give a good reset for other plants that are around. It's so vigorous that it's not allowing a lot of diversity around it. But you can see when it does produce fruit, they're pretty much ginormous. They're one of the larger fruits. Let's see if I can get my hand there for reference. There you go. Up there with some of the biggest. These are in the class of European-sized fruits. moderately sweet, okay. But again, for processing, who cares? It's one of those things, it's the strongest vegetatively that we have to work with. So it's amazing biomass crop, windbreak, all that sort of utility, really decent nectar flow, really decent and very large fruit set. And that is Scotia. Out here on the other side of the fence is Marge, which I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure that I know that Marge and Scotia are actually different. I think they might be, but they sure feel very similar. So if they aren't the same plant, they certainly are close enough that they pollinate with one another. Everything I'd say about Scotia, I would say about Marge. It is extremely vigorous. It has broad leaves, very, very positively responsive to hard cutting, a little bit sluggish in fruiting after an initial cut. So unlike the pure American genetics, that little bit of European in there means that after the first year of a hard cut, you get less fruit and then it comes up to full speed again. These make very large fruits, really disease resistant. You're seeing sparseness in the fruit here because basically all of the elderberry out here, we're on the other side of our fence line. There's sea berries down the way that we harvest from. This has become a corridor of bird support. Basically everything that's out here in this nice open spot where the birds like to be near a pond is for the birds. This Scotia was picked 100% clean just about by birds, and we're thrilled with that. There's enough for us. So there's Scotia hanging out with Marge, looking really, really similar. Extremely vigorous, disease resistant, intersectional between European and American genetics with American dominance. Didn't even realize there was a bird in there. That's my cue to stop talking over here because that bird was coming in for breakfast. Good reminder, elderberry is a quintessentially perfect character for wildlife support, both nectar and for wild flying insects. So much medicine for so many different little people. You can see that little friend there waiting on the fence, waiting for me to leave to pop back onto their breakfast of the morning, which is Ranch. Now, Ranch is a fully American genetic variety of elderberry. Sorry, little friend, you're gonna just bop off for a moment. I'm sure you'll be fine in a minute. This one's gonna be hard to get to. This is our chicken summer run area, and it's meant for our birds and wild birds and not so much for us, so I can't really get super close. But there's Ranch. This one's got some yellowing. I think that might just have been excessive water and some of these sunchokes need to be cut back. I don't think it's a good indication of the vigor. So Ranch right there, you can see the leaves. This is another plant that looks a little bit healthier. Really fine leaves, almost ornamental, almost cannabis looking in its morphology of the leaf. It's a relatively small fruit set or fruit size, but in pretty heavy production. What I love about Ranch, so this is a truly American plant. The stems are relatively thin. They're very compact. They want to get 6 to 8 feet and they seem to top out there. So for really interesting foliage, for a very manageable, relatively human scale or smaller sized plant, Ranch seems to be incredibly good that way. And it's straight American, so it'll pollinate with wild plants around, and also York and Wildwood and Johns and Adams and the like. I can push my way through here. You can see clearly we are not a commercial orchard for elderberry production. It's just basically ecosystem service in all the ways and for nursery work. But pretty, actually, decently sized flower head there. You can see the fruit is not that massive. Again, this is still Ranch. A little smaller, but still quite nice, easy to pick, so easy to access. We'll take some of these, but basically any of the fruit that is in our chicken run is meant mainly for the chickens and for whatever birds want to work with them. The wild birds tend to land on top of the plants and eat from the top. Our chickens tend to wait for the fruit to fall, but I would be surprised if it wasn't close to 100% of all fruit is consumed between the winged friends of our stewardship or the wild stewardship. But again, we'll get enough from a few of them for freezing and processing. It's really about everybody else with these plants. It's a good reminder as well that Ranch I was just working with there. You can see where it's wiggling between all the sorghum. That is a profoundly competitive context right there. There's massive aggressive annual growth to the east, then a tiny bit of light accessing in for the elderberries with tons of intermixed competition of sunchokes, and then a huge aggressive wall of willows just to the west. There's just enough for them to eke out their existence in there. It's a good reminder that you really do not need a massive open full sun field for elderberry. In fact, there's camouflage to the point where you can barely even find them in there. And elderberry is thriving and growing behind this wall of sorghum. You can see more over there. It is such a great understory tuck-in plant, although it likes sun too. So many more exciting named cultivars to look at. I haven't even really spoken about the European types, but in our small spot here, we don't really have many of those. In the comments, share some of your favorite cultivars that you've worked with. I know I've skipped a lot, but this is what I have for the morning. What I'd like to do here, though, is talk about some seedlings and encourage folks to be open about the idea of spontaneous seedlings showing up in their landscape and giving them a few years to show who they are. Let me show some examples of random seedlings that showed up that we left where they were and how ridiculously nice the fruit is. If we walk back through the bird jungle zone over here, we can find, so again, I was looking at the marge before. There was a scotia. Back in the garden is marge and wildwood. This is a seedling. I did not plant this. This is basically pooped out by a wild bird. Part of the reason why it's nice to have birds everywhere this is reason 749,000,003. They sit on fences and they poop out seeds, and you get seedlings of plants. And this elderberry was out of the way enough. It's just getting into the realm of in the way enough that we'll have to cut them, but just in time to collect cuttings. And that is the fruit set on this ridiculous champion. That's up there with the largest fruit I've ever seen on an elderberry, with pollination that is beyond. I mean, it's like completely full heads here. I would suspect that this is a child that is a mixture, actually, from the fineness of the leaf. There's some ranch parentage in here. From the size of the fruit, there's either scotia or marge in there. The fun of letting these spontaneously happen, this I would consider probably one of the nicest elderberries we have in all of our elderberries. It's very disease resistant, massive fruit, really beautiful flowers, nice quality looking leaf, and even ripening on the flowers. We're at an inflection point here. This is the kind of thing where now I could try to own this plant. I could say, oh, I'm going to name it this, I'm going to register it and patent it and make it so that people cannot propagate this. But that is not that fun. Instead, in the comments, what do you think this plant should be called? If I find a name that seems really fun, we'll call it that. It will be completely open and available for everyone to propagate clonally, or even better, by seed. And we'll cut this plant back enough that we can actually get through our garden and out through the fence. That's my main goal at this point, is to be able to actually move through here. And this novel, very, very complex hybrid, spontaneously generated by the pollen being mixed by the bees and being planted by the birds and then identified by the humans and propagated outward, will be freely available for everyone, as all plants should be. So let us know what this one ought to be called. I want to explore one last friend in here and then probably wrap this video up. This is a lot of elder chat, but feel free to continue on with it in the comments if you're into it. This again is a seedling, same picture as the last one. We had nothing to do with this as far as, you know, oh, we're painting the pollen from one variety onto another flower and blah, blah, blah. This is a bird pooping out a seed. And probably they were sitting actually in a seedling blackcurrant that was here when they pooped it out. That'd be my guess, or they flew overhead. And this is another one that I would describe as probably in the realm of what someone would consider patenting, which we will not. This is up there with the largest fruit set I could ever want to imagine on a given head. Here's one that's a little more ripe. This was one a bird was just working on. I think we'll harvest some of these to freeze and process later on. This is really amazing. And not as big of a fruit as the other one, but so dense. Here's one, pretty darn dense, really even ripening. This, I again would suspect there's some influence of ranch in the background. Probably this is a mix of everybody again. Let me know in the comments if you know how easily and well they mix, but I would guess York is in this, a little Scotia, a fair bit of ranch, but it's also its own unique child in the world, coming into adolescence, coming into adulthood, very much ready to drop its own seed to continue that breeding work that nature loves to do, that we will get out of the way of. In fact, you can see here are little kids of this coming up that have another year or two to express. By next year, this one will express what they're all about. That one back in there is fruiting and starting to make a sense of who they are in the world. We can identify that. We've yet to find an elderberry seedling that we thought, oh, we got to rip them out, they're so bad. They're almost always pretty unique and worthwhile. And the fact that we can take cuttings and move them on into this world without much fuss is pretty fantastic. So lots of named varieties throughout this whole garden. We probably have 5 or 6 named varieties. In total, we have about 10 to 15, but more important than the name variety is to allow for the openness of nature to express the desire for their own destiny, their own evolution. These are plants that are novel, that have come up during weird climate moments of very extreme cold and then drought. So they are climate adapting seedlings that are happening, and to not own them conceptually seems pretty critical, especially if we're allowing nature to spontaneously have these seedlings show up. But to steward them and bring them forward, have creative, thoughtful names. So who should this one be called? What does that inspire name-wise? I don't know. But we will probably be offering cuttings of these quote-unquote named varieties, but very, very explicitly being clear that we do not feel ownership over them. I have no intellectual property ownership. How dare I? This is nature. We're just here for the ride and trying our best to support and create the context for nature to express itself as thoroughly and healthfully as possible. And in the meantime, have our needs met both medicinally and food and calorie-wise and heat-wise, so we're comfortable enough to do that work. And that's about as much as I feel like we're owed in this world. And that feels like a nice place to drop in to the ecological niche. Thank you so much for watching, and let us know in the comments your elderberry thoughts and dreams.